Um, we will get started. Today, I will be covering insect ID for specialty crop growers. Um, so again, my name is Cindy Kron. I'm the North Coast IPM Advisor. I advise for commercial crops of grapes, walnuts, pears, and olives in Sonoma, Napa, Lake, and Mendocino counties. So my focus, I'm an entomologist by training, and this is my focus of insect pests and invasive species that affect those major crops. We're going to take a deep dive today in insect identification. So, entomology, we'll start from the basics. Insects are the most abundant animals on the planet with over 1 million species, and we are continuing to still identify new species every year. So the vast majority of insects are either beneficial, which means that they are helpful to people, or they're harmless. They're what we would call neutral insects in an agricultural landscape. And I know it might not seem that way when you're dealing with insects that cause damage, but it's only about 2 to 5% of insects that cause damage to crops. Um, so insects occupy virtually all habitats on Earth except the open ocean. We do not have any aquatic insects in salt water. We do have aquatic insects in lakes and ponds, but not salt water. Insects live in or on animals, plants, soil, wood, structures, buildings, carpet, furniture, and fabric, water bodies like streams, lakes, ocean shores, and stored food products. They occupy a very, very wide range. Before we get started, I want to talk out some basics so there's an understanding of what it is we're referring to. You know, insects' life is they are classified from a larger group to a smaller group to a smaller group, smaller group, smaller group, until you get down to the genus species. So when we're talking about a certain species of insects, say codling moth, that is a specific species that is a part of a genus, that is a part of a larger family, a part of a larger order. So codling moth would be in the order Lepidoptera. Which covers moths and butterflies. So it's important to have a general understanding. You don't have to memorize this, but just a general understanding that as we classify further down in this hierarchy, these groups become smaller and smaller and smaller until we're talking about a single insect as a species. So our focus will be on orders and then a little bit on families. So order is large group like flies, hemipterans, moths and butterflies are grouped together. Wasp and ants are grouped together, and they are in these what we call orders. So these very larger groups. To give an example of how this is broken down, ladybird beetle that you can see on the right, this is a convergent ladybird beetle. It's very common to find in agricultural crops, all agricultural crops pretty much in California. So our kingdom would be Animalia, phylum is Arthropoda, class Insecta. So there's our group of insects. Our classes is insects. Order is Coleoptera. Coleoptera is for beetle. Family is Coccinellidae. So these are all the ladybird beetles, which is a wide range of species. And this genus is Hippodamia, and the species is Convergens. And so this is how this insect is classified and understood. Some common names is convergent ladybird beetle, or ladybird beetle, ladybug is commonly used to identify this specific species. So again, our focus here will be more on the orders. How do we classify the insects into certain orders? So some basic insect characteristics. What makes an insect an insect? An insect will have three distinct body regions: head, thorax, and abdomen. Now, I do want to do the caveat that whenever I say something is absolute, I have always found in entomology that there are exceptions. So, although sometimes you're not able to see the distinction between the thorax and the abdomen, because over time that distinction is no longer obvious. But it is there. It's just not so apparent as the image below, where you can definitely see, oh, here's the thorax, here's the abdomen. Antennae, there's one pair of antennae in insects, and we have wings, two pairs. Some lack wings, and so this again and is an exception. There are some insects, say female mealybugs, they do not have wings. The male mealybugs have wings. So there are some exceptions into the wing, but they evolved with wings and they lost wings over time, if that makes sense. So their ancestors had wings. Six jointed legs. So we have six jointed legs that are attached to the thorax of the insect. So we have three pairs. We have the four legs. You have your middle legs and your hind legs. So here's some photos of arthropods, but they're not insects. Remember, arthropods is a higher classification. So pill bugs are crustaceans, snails and slugs are mollusks, millipedes and centipedes. You have ticks that are an example of arachnids or spiders. Mites are arachnids, spiders are arachnids. So these are arthropods and they can cause damage. Some of them can cause damage in crops, but they are not insects. They do not have six legs. The easiest feature that I find is that, okay, is there six legs? To be able to distinguish whether you're dealing with an insect or not. And so these ones, again, they can cause damage in agriculture, but it is not the focus of entomology. So again, insects versus arachnids. On the left-hand side, you have a head, thorax, and an abdomen for an insect, where a spider or a mite will have two body parts, as you can see in the image on the right-hand side. Insects will have three pairs of legs. Spiders and mites will have four pairs of legs. Insects have antennae and they have wings, and spiders and mites have no wings and no antennae. The mouth parts of insects vary considerably depending on what it is that they feed on. So we can find chewing mouth parts, piercing, sucking mouth parts, sponging, siphoning, rasping, sucking, cutting, sponging, chewing, lapping. And all of these mouth parts are dependent on what they feed on. And so it's important to, we're going to really dive into mouth parts a little bit later, because mouth parts are important in understanding what insect can cause the damage that you're seeing in your field. So the mouth parts, though, spiders and mites, are piercing, sucking. That's all they have. And so, again, there is that separation between the two groups. Insects are grouped in about 30 categories called orders. So earlier I said we're going to focus on the orders of insects. So there's about 30 categories. And according to their wing similarities and these mouth parts that we were talking about. The 10 most abundant orders that we find are cockroaches, thrips, dragonflies and damselflies are together, lacewings, antlions are together, caddisflies, true bugs, aphids, and scales. So this is Hemiptera. I will point out that hemipterans there is a large number of insect pests of crops that are in the order Hemiptera. There is also a large number of beneficials that are in the order Hemiptera. So we're really going to break those down later on. Hymenoptera, which are ants, bees, and wasps. Those are all grouped together. Lepidoptera, your butterflies and your moths. Diptera, which are your flies and your mosquitoes. And Coleoptera, which are your beetles and weevils. And so these are just the top 10, but again, there's around 30 of them in total. So when you're trying to think about insects and how do we get to all these different orders, there is definitely maps that break off, early insects and then the distinguishing features as it moves along. This is very interesting to look at and to break down of, oh, well, this group has this in common here, and then it splits off here and it continues to split off. But it's really above and beyond what is needed to know for uh, basic insect identification. What we have here, though, in the bottom, you can see a lot of the different orders by name, and we tend to work with the ones that are from the middle on to the right more often than the ones to the left in agriculture. So let's start with the insect orders. Again, Columbella, which most people will probably recognize as springtails. There is a wide range of what springtails can look like, and they're pretty small. Point 0.4, less than 0.41 inches. There's about 8,000 species that can be found. They have a furcula, which basically is this appendage on the underside of the abdomen that is held under tension. And so when you go, say, to touch a springtail, they basically move that furcula and it's able to spring off of whatever substrate they have and jump like what you think of a flea, pretty far and pretty high for such a small insect. So this is how you pretty much know when you're dealing with springtails that they're all jumping, and you're like, wow, what are these? Because they're pretty tiny, so you don't see the features I'm showing you on the left-hand side. These are taken under magnification. Basically, what you're going to notice out in the field is that there's all these things springing around. In the soil. So you'll find them feeding on leaf litter, logs, dung, cave, moist areas. They really break down what's in the soil. And so these are considered beneficial. They're not affecting your crop. Their mouth parts are within their head. They're called entognatha. So their mouth parts are in their head instead of where you can see the mouth parts on the outside. You don't with these insects. So also within this group of entognatha, which is the mouth parts inside the head, you have protura and you have diplura on the right hand side. So one thing, again, very small. These are also found in your soil, leaf litter, and usually you don't even see them. They're so tiny. But you can see them sometimes in dark soils. You'll come across your diplura in the soil. Now, this diplura that you see on the right-hand side should not be confused with symphyllans. Symphyllans are on the left-hand side, and it looks very similar. But the difference is that symphyllans are can be detrimental to row crops. They can feed on the roots, and really, as you can see in the photo in the bottom, you'll have plants that just collapse and no longer exist in an area where there's some phylums. But the difference when you're looking at some phylums compared to Diplura is that Diplura, remember, is an insect. It has 6 legs. Symphylans have multiple legs. I believe it's 10 to 12 pairs. It's a lot more. You can see legs around the whole body, right? So Diplura, though, you have 6 legs. So under magnification, you should be able to distinguish whether there's more than 3 pairs of legs or there's 3 pair of legs. Symphylans are the ones you do need to be concerned about. Diplura, you do not need to be concerned about. Those are good. Symphylans are not. Okay, moving on, Ephemeroptera, which are your mayflies, and you can see here, mayflies are associated with water. The immature stages live in water, usually streams and ponds. And the wings are sort of funky. They don't fold flat across the body. They're like up, like a mohawk on their back. And their larvae, again, are in the water, aquatic, and they are also carnivorous. So they are predators in the water that feed on things like mosquito larvae. So these can be beneficial in streams and ponds, rivers. Odonata is your dragonflies and damselflies. These two, their larvae are aquatic. You can see the larvae in the photo here in the middle. And you'll find these in water, and they're pretty chunky. With damselflies being similar, but not as chunky as your dragonfly larvae. They have round heads with very large eyes, and long, the adults have long membranous wings. Again, the larvae are aquatic and carnivorous. So both the adults and the larvae are beneficials. They both are carnivorous. They both feed on other insect species. So in your garden, in your orchard, in your row crops, these are good to have around. And you often find them in larger numbers when you have some type of irrigation pond or open body of water. Sometimes even flowing water in riparian areas, you will see larger populations of damselflies and dragonflies. Dermaptera, which are your earwigs, on the left-hand side, they have a pair of cerci, which are those pinchers in the back of the abdomen, the very tip of the abdomen. Sometimes they're very pronounced pinchers, sometimes they're very short and stubby. They do not crawl in your ears at night, which is what old wives' tale. Um, so these insects can become damaging on fruits. I know, strawberries on different row crops. These can become pest species at times. They also will feed on detritus that is in the ground, so they serve more than one purpose. Sometimes they're an issue, and sometimes they're not. Orthoptera on the right-hand side is a range of grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. So you have your grasshopper on top, you have your katydid on the right here, and then on the bottom is a mole cricket. They have modified hind legs for jumping. They're called saltorial. So you can see they have really long, large legs that allow them to jump long distances. These insects can't, yes, they are damaging to crops. They eat leaf tissue, sometimes to such an excess that it affects the crop itself. So, looking at your grasshopper, crickets, and katydids, they have chewing mouth parts and they go through gradual metamorphosis. We're going to cover what all this means and implications in later slides. So you see the katydid on the left-hand side, grasshopper on the right, and in the middle is a Jerusalem cricket. The Jerusalem crickets, to my knowledge, don't cause any damage in row crops. They are predators. And I wouldn't recommend picking these ones up, the ones in the middle, because they can bite you. A lot of insects won't bite you, are not capable of biting you. But Jerusalem crickets, they got a nice pinch if they bite you. So again, if you startle them, if you pick them up and try to handle them, I do not recommend it. Looking a little closer at your earwigs on the right-hand side, you can see what I was saying with attacking strawberries. They can cause damage. They can also cause damage to seedlings that you see on the left-hand side. Newly planted seedlings, they can chew away, basically chew it down to a stub when they're really young. They love succulent green plant material. So sometimes they're an issue and sometimes they can be beneficial to the soil, but you have to weigh out what crop it is that you're dealing with and how they affect your crop. So, Mantodia, which are your praying mantises. So these are called mantids. They have raptorial front legs. So they're instead of their hind legs being for jumping, their front legs are for grabbing onto prey. So they have these long arms that they can reach out and grab prey, and then it's a jagged edge, so like it holds on to them, and they can feed. So they are predators. These are beneficial. These are generalist predators. So I should talk about that for a second. There's a difference between specialized predators and generalist predators. Generalist predators eat a variety of insects. They will eat the good, the bad, and everything in between. So they don't see the difference between eating a ladybug or eating a coddling moth, one being a pest and one being beneficial. But they are good to have around because they keep a lot of insect populations in check. Um, and you can see a photo here of an ootheca, which is their egg sac. They will lay these egg sacs, and they do look different. This one, it looks smaller than other ones that I've seen. Each species, it looks slightly different, but these are attached to wooden stakes, metal stakes, any kind of wood surface, metal surface that you find out in the orchard or out in the fields. They will lay their eggs and they overwinter this way. So oftentimes in wintertime, you'll come across this and be like, what is this? And smush it or get rid of it. But these are your praying mantids that will be emerging the following spring. So these are good to keep around if you find egg casings like this in your field. These are good natural biocontrol. And so recommend don't destroy it. Let it be. They will emerge come springtime. Socodia, which are bark lice, book lice, and parasitic lice. Now we know what the parasitic lice looks like because these affect humans, whether it be crab louse or whether it be head lice. But these other book lice and bark lice, you'll find these out. You'll find bark lice in the fields. And they look similar with the way they hold their wings to psyllids, but they're not psyllids. So the bark lice are good to have around. They feed on fungal spores, break down plant material. Book lice, we often find in cardboard. When you're storing books or things that are in cardboard, say in the garage, you might open it up and find some book lice, crawling out. They break down the glue in book bindings. So they're not an issue in agriculture, but they might be an issue in your home. But again, the focus here would be the bark lice that you can see in the field, that this is not a bad insect to have around. So it's not one that you're concerned about. It's not affecting your crop. Thysanoptera, which are your thrips. I think pretty much every grower has had to deal with thrips at some time. You can see they're pretty tiny. As this is a flower, you can see, there's probably like 30 of them on there. So thrips can be, certain species of thrips are major problems, economic problems in crops. But it should be pointed out, you can see this black hunter thrip that's right here. These are predators and these feed on your the predatory thrips, the black ones, this one here, the black hunter thrip will feed on your pest species of thrips. So there are good and there are bad. So it's important to be able to distinguish between the two. I will say that black hunter thrips that you see here that are predatory, notice their head is very narrow and elongate compared to a pest species thrip, which seems to have like a normal head. So the black hunter thrips, they have this very distinctive long, you know, extended head. And of course, they're black in color, which most pest species are not. Hemiptera. Now, we talked about Hemiptera. Unfortunately, there's no true common name for Hemiptera. But again, this is a group of insects that include a lot of crop pests, but also a lot of beneficials. So this is a very interesting group that we'll dive in even more a little bit later. But you have your true bugs, your cicadas, hoppers, so it's plant hoppers, leaf hoppers, sharpshooters, aphids are all in this group, this order of Hemiptera. They all have piercing, sucking mouth parts. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more, but you can see this bottom photo to the right where you can see the mouth part coming out. It's a rostrum, and they use that to be able to put into plant material, or to, if they're predators, attack other insects, put it into other insects, and attack them. So this will bug on the bottom right is a predator. So that rostrum is nice and thick, and it's able to penetrate the exoskeleton of other insects as they attack them. So, looking a little bit closer at thrips, they have fringed wings, which is one of the differences that really stands out about this order. So, you can see in this photo to the right, or the drawing to the right, the wings have all of this like fringe. It's a very, very narrow wing, but all this fringe coming off of the sides of the wing. This insect goes through complete metamorphosis. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what does that mean and what does that look like. You can sort of see on the right-hand side their development, how they progress through their development. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. And they are plant feeders. So what that means is that the damage you're going to see from any insect with piercing, sucking mouth parts that is a plant feeder tends to be this stippling. So this leaf on the left-hand side should be all green, but it's not. What we see is a lot of white portions, these little portions of the leaf that no longer are green. So what is happening is that this insect is putting its mouth part into the plant. It's penetrating the plant cell and it's removing the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is green. The chlorophyll is what causes that leaf to be green. It removes the chlorophyll and it feeds on that, but that leaf needs that chlorophyll in order to conduct photosynthesis. So that's how the leaves start to eventually, enough damage will make that leaf shut down. Um, and this affects obviously whatever crop is attached to these leaves. You have a high enough infestation, enough leaves shutting down, that's going to affect a wide range of the quality of the fruit or vegetables that you're trying to produce. The fruits and the vegetables need the photosynthate that the chlorophyll produces in order to grow in size, in order to come to color. And so this is very important. These insects are so small that it's not hard for them to increase in large numbers before they're noticed. And by the time they're noticed, there's usually damage already associated with it. So in addition, this insect, you'll see these black tar-like fecal specks. So you'll see these little black specks on leaves. And only certain insects will have those black specks. This helps in identification when it comes down to, okay, I see the damage, but I don't see the insect anymore. What was I dealing with? And that happens often. The insect is not always present. And so this is one of the insects, when you see stippling and you see the black specks, this is one of the insects that it could be.
Hey, Cindy.
Yeah,
Real quick, sorry to interrupt. Real quick, we
of
have a
course.
great question from Wendy in the chat. You might be getting to this later on, but just in case, I wanted to ask, is there a difference in leaf damage between thrips and mites?
It depends on the crop. Some mites will cause a rusting color, which looks different than the damage from thrips. They both have piercing, sucking mouth parts. They both are feeding on the inside of the plant cell, which includes the chlorophyll. But some mites on some crops will produce a reddish rusting color, for instance, in grapes, which is what one of the crops I work in. Thrips, the damage looks a little bit different, although they are technically doing the same thing of removing the chlorophyll from the leaf. Does that make sense? It's hard because it's not there isn't an answer that goes across all crops. So it would be a certain crop, what does it look like? Now the thing is that um you can narrow it down to like, okay, well, it's a hemipteran or it could be mites, and then use a hand lens to look and see what you find under either a microscope or a hand lens of what is the culprit, what is causing the damage. We're going to go over a little bit later other things that can help indicate if the insect is not there or the mite is not there, indicate what was the cause after the fact. Is that good?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Hemiptera. Let's break down what does that mean. Hemiptera means half wings. And it's because of this triangle in the back that's formed by the wings. The forewings, you have the hind wings that you see sticking out at the very bottom, and the forewings are wrapped over, but it doesn't cover the whole back of the abdomen. So they're called hemiptera. Hemi, meaning half, and then wings. Um, so, piercing, sucking mouth parts for this whole order, they go through a gradual metamorphosis. And what that means, and we're going to go even further later, the immatures and nymphs are not, so sorry, that should be pushed over. So what gradual metamorphosis means is that they go from egg to an immature stage, and each time they molt, they get a little bit larger. But the immature stages look very similar to the adult. When we talk about complete metamorphosis, the immature stage looks nothing like the adult. And we're going to break down more into detail with photos side by side to show you what exactly I mean as we're talking about the differences. So immatures are not nymphs. They're called larvae. Um, sorry, I'm reading that too fast. Immatures are nymphs. They're not larvae. I was like, wait, that doesn't make sense. They're not larvae. So when you think of larvae, you think of caterpillars. But when it comes to nymphs, the immature stages they're referred to as nymphs in the order Hemiptera. So this order has a whole lot of families, a whole lot of insects that you're going to know or recognize. Stink bugs, assassin bugs, bed bugs, plant bugs, seed bugs, aphids, leafhoppers, cicadas, tree hoppers, plant hoppers, spittle bugs, scales, mealybugs, whiteflies, etc. It's a lot. Um, this is also the order that has the suborder that can be called true bugs. They are, when you refer to an insect as a bug, there's only a section of insects that are true bugs, that are truly can be called bugs. Um, but I think we're going to break that down here, the next slide. So the suborder. So you have the order Hemiptera. Right under Hemiptera, you have two suborders. Actually, it's three, but two that we're going to focus on. Echinorinca is the true bugs. These are the ones that technically you could be calling bugs. Not all insects are bugs, but all bugs are insects. So I know it's a technicality of like using the words. Um, so wings are half hard and half membranous. Remember the hemi, half wings. They include stink bugs, assassin bugs, bed bugs, seed bugs, leaf-footed bugs, lygus bugs, just a wide range. And so you can see there is a wide range here, including your bed bugs, which you wouldn't think would be associated, but they actually are in the same suborder. So in the true bugs, remember I said that the nymphs look very much like the adult. This is incomplete metamorphosis. And so this immature stage here, you're looking at your pronotum that's in yellow, and then your wing pads, which would be in brown. And then you can see how it progresses. As the insect gets larger, each time it molts, which is getting rid of the exoskeleton and then growing a little larger. Um, it slightly changes over time, but they look very similar to the immature stage looks very similar to the adults. And so as they move on to the fourth instar, they have these wing pads that are growing. And then the fifth is usually more pronounced, and come the sixth instars when it's an adult. It has full wings. It does not get any larger. It does not molt anymore after it becomes an adult. And then they become sexually reproductive. So immature stages cannot mate, they cannot reproduce. It is only the adults, once they molt, that they'll have full wings for most insects. There are exceptions, but this is when they're able to then mate and reproduce. Here are some photos of some common stink bugs that you will find in the field. Some are invasive, some are native. So brown marmorated stink bug here on the left is invasive. This is the female male, but here the dusky stink bug looks similar, but it is not invasive. This is native. Also in the middle, southern green, red-shouldered, and conspur stink bug are very common ones that I see in the field all the time. Bagrata bug on the right is invasive. It is very small, considerably smaller than most stink bugs. Conchuela bug will become a problem in some row crops. Harlequin bug, definitely a problem in row crops. Um, and Bagrata bug looks very similar to Harlequin. The only difference is that Bagrata bug is considerably smaller than Harlequin. And then here's a photo of rough stink bug, which is a predator. So that's something to keep in mind. Not all stink bugs are bad. Not all thrips are bad. There are predators within the same family. Um, that so we can't think of them all as bad. And it's important to be able to identify what it is you're dealing with so that you're not applying a control measure that kills your natural enemies without knowing that it's a natural enemy. So, some other true bugs that you can find in the field and likely will. Box elder bug, they aggregate in very large numbers, not usually an issue in crops, but a border plant bug looks similar. Leaf-foot oak bug, definitely an issue in certain crops. We have soapberry bug down here, and then squash bug again with row crops definitely can become an issue. Funny thing is that squash bug and leaf-footed bug are the same family. They look very different, but they actually key out to the same family. And both are problems in orchard crops and also in row crops. Um, we will skip this because we don't need to go over bedbug life cycle. Not an issue with crops. So the other, remember I said Acanarhyncha was the suborder. There's the second suborder is Sternarhyncha, and that includes aphids, scales, whiteflies, mealybugs, and psyllids. A lot of these are plant pests and problematic. So you can see on the left here, Ellie, do you see my cursor? What I'm moving my
Yes.
cursor? Okay,
Yeah, I
good.
can see it.
Okay, so here's the whiteflies on the left here. Um, and these are the pupal casings that the adult has emerged from. So a lot of times, maybe you don't see the white fly, but you'll see these pupal casings on the underside of leaves. Those are signs that white flies have been there. The middle, you have different types of scales. This is one type of scale, but you know, there's different types of scales out there. This here is Asian citrus psyllid on the right, but other psyllids have a very similar look. And when they feed, they tilt their abdomen up so you can see them. They are a weird angle as they feed. The bottom here is aphids. Aphids come in a range of colors. Some have wings, some don't. Um, but they are soft-bodied insects that they increase in numbers so quickly on a crop and cause a lot of damage. And then mealybugs. There's a wide range of mealybugs and mealybugs on a wide range of crops, not just grapes. We have mealybugs on citrus, and they become economic pests on other crops outside of just grapes. Okay, insect. Let's see. Neuroptera, antlions, owl flies, lacewings, and mantid flies. So the ones that you're really going to be concerned about in agriculture are your lacewings. Your antlions, owl flies, mantid flies, they don't affect agriculture, but it's important to be able to look at these and recognize them and see them so that when they arrive, say randomly in your orchard or your row crops, you know that it's not something you need to be concerned about. It's not something affecting your crop. Just because an insect is present doesn't mean that it's affecting your crop or feeding on your crop. Sometimes it's feeding on insects that are feeding on your crop. So something to keep in mind that although we're covering not all the insects affect your crop, but it's important to understand and see what diversity is out there so that you know when to be concerned and when not to be concerned. Now, your green lacewings, your brown lacewings, so your brown lacewings here, your green lacewings here, these are great predators. These are good to have around. Brown lacewings tend to be in cooler weather, so you'll find them more in abundance in fall and winter, where green lacewings tend to be more spring and summer. Although you can find them both year round, but you'll find a higher population and then a higher population. So they sort of take over the same space at different times of year. Your Rhiphidioptera, which are your snake flies, these are really, really cool. These are predators, and you will find these in areas that are close to wooded areas. So if you have a riparian area or you have a forested area nearby, you might find these predators coming into your your cropping system. And they're predators. They're good to have around. They're eating the other insects that are out there. Um, they do look sort of funky with this very long neck, and they sort of look like a snake. Um, but they're great to have around. So don't fret if you see them. It's a positive thing, even though they look a little, some people would say scary. I just think they look cool. So again, your lacewings. So I wanted to break down what does it look like? You want to support them in your field. So you need to know what all the stages look like because they don't look like each other. They go through complete metamorphosis, which means the immature stage looks nothing like the adults. So on the right-hand side, you can see the eggs on the stalks. And so here on the left-hand side, you can see a photo. The green lacewing eggs are laid on this little stalk and at the tip. So when you see these on a leaf, sometimes you only see one, sometimes you'll see them in a group. Leave them alone. Let them be. These are eggs. They will emerge as these larvae here. And the larvae are very voracious feeders. They have these long mandibles and they just run up and they pierce a soft-bodied insect and they basically just suck the inside dry. And then they move on to the next, and they eat so many soft-bodied insects. So your aphids, your mealybugs, leafhopper nymphs, they are really good predators. And so the larvae you can see here, they'll pupate into a cocoon and then emerge as an adult. And the larvae do not look like the adult. Again, complete metamorphosis. So here we have our green lacewings. Our green lacewings are nectar and pollen feeders. They are not predators, but their larvae are predators. And brown lacewings, both the adults and the immatures are predators. So both of them help with pest control. Diptera, which are our flies. So flies have halteres. These are modified hind wings. So you have your forewings up front, which are large, and then they have these little knobs instead of having a second set of wings. So it's best shown here. This is Topulides, so this is your crane fly. And you can see this very large set of wings in the front, and then these little knobs in the back that you can barely see. Those are their halteres. Those are their modified hind wings. So that's one of the distinguishing features that lets you know when you're dealing with a fly or a bee or a wasp. Bees and wasps have two set of wings. Flies only have one set with the halteres. And there's a lot of mimics. Like you can see here on this fly, here's your little halteres in the back. And so this is it's a wasp mimic. When you're seeing it fly around flowers, you might think it's a wasp or a bee, but it's actually a fly. And there's quite a few mimics out there. So it's something to keep in mind is that just because something looks like a certain order or certain family of insects, it's not necessarily true. Sometimes you have to look a little bit closer. So here we have olive fruit fly. This is an insect pest of olives, table olives, and oil olives. Mosquitoes is a pest of humans. This is a tachinid fly. It's tachinidae. These are parasitoids actually, which is surprising, but they are. And your crane flies, you will find the larvae in the soil. So sometimes when you're digging up soil, if there's patches of grass that's dying, and you dig it up, you'll find the larvae feeding on the roots of grasses in the soil. Although the adults fly and they're above ground. To vanity, these are deer flies. These will feel like they bite you. Um, these are annoying. Coleoptera, we have beetles. So, elytra, which are their forewings, is hardened with some exception. The soldier beetle is not as hard as, say, as this beetle down here. Their hind wings are tucked under the hardened outer forewings, and so you don't necessarily see them most of the time, but they are there. And so when they go to fly, you can see the photo in the middle. They flip their forewings forward and their hind wings come out, and it helps navigate with flight. They have chewing mouth parts. This is something to keep in mind because the damage from them, say, compared to Hemiptera, is going to look different. And so this is important to know that all beetles have chewing mouth parts. Not all beetles are predators. Not all beetles are insect pests. So it's something to keep in mind. Here we have our flat-headed borer. We have a weevil here. We have a scarab beetle here, soldier beetle. So there's a wide range. They all have different hosts. Soldier beetles are predators. We'll cover them in more depth in a later slide. So, flies can have a range of mouth parts depending on what they feed on. You have rasping, sponging, sucking mouth parts as adults. So, like, here's a mosquito would have sucking mouth parts. It puts its mouth part into the human and then sucks out blood. Um, they go through a complete metamorphosis. So you have your immature stage does not look like the adult. In addition, another part of a complete metamorphosis is that the immature stage will feed on a different food source than the adult. Where incomplete metamorphosis, where the nymph looks similar to the adult, they tend to feed on the same crops side by side, the same food source. So that's important when later on when you're trying to identify insects in the field, that type of behavior. Um, so again, one pair of wings and one pair is these reduced halteres. Oftentimes these halteres are hidden. Like you see this photo on the right, you don't see the halteres, but you would have to like lift up the wings and look for them. They are there underneath the wings and all that hair. So we have beneficial flies, which I think we're often raised thinking all flies are bad, and they're not. We do have predaceous aphid midge that you can see here. The larvae attacks aphids, and here's the adults. You have syrphid flies. These are usually bee and wasp mimics. And this is the larva to the left. And these also feed on soft-bodied insects like aphids and leafhopper nymphs. And these are good to have in the field. So when you see this, this is good biocontrol. We don't want to get rid of this. Parasitic flies. So here's the family Tachinidae, and they lay their eggs, say, on larvae, moth or butterfly larvae. The larvae will emerge, and then they will feed on the larvae until it dies, and then pupate, and then emerge as an adult tachinid fly. Okay, Coleoptera, beetles, weevils. You probably recognize some of these. Here's your striped cucumber beetle. This is your ladybird beetle, scarab beetle. This is a type of weevil. This is the larvae of scarab beetles. So there's a wide range of beetles out there. And different species are often mistaken for each other. So this spotted cucumber beetle is not the same as a ladybird beetle. The one on the left causes damage. The one on the right is a predator. This Japanese beetle is not the same as this green June beetle. Um, and so it's they're often, they might have similar markings and be confused with each other, but some are good predators and some are pest species and then some are neutral. They exist, they're there, they're not attacking your crop. So here's some beneficial beetles that we have. Um, Beetles go through complete metamorphosis, so the immature stage looks nothing like the adult, which makes it hard because then for each insect, you have to know what each one looks like, right? At certain times of the year, you might not have the adult present, only the immature. But if you only know what the adult looks like, then you might be getting rid of the immature stage, which doesn't support your biocontrol that you have in your field. So for instance, here is the Millibug Destroyer adult and the Millibug Destroyer larvae. They look very different from each other. This larvae mimics what a millibug looks like, so it's able to creep up and feed on millibugs without being attacked by ants, which tend to protect millibugs and prevent biocontrol from getting to them. So they have this natural wax that the immature produces that mimics the millibug, and it's able to bypass the ants that are protecting them. Here's a soldier beetle, Staphylinidae. These are rove beetles. These are beneficial. You'll find these in your soil and climbing around your crops. Crabbed beetles are predators. So, this is your ladybird beetles. There's different species. They have different markings. Um, But ladybird beetles, their larvae looks like this. Now, each species has slightly different coloration. You can get ones that are almost all white with a little yellow on them. You have different patterns of orange and black, but they have this general shape and look about them. So even if they're different species, if you're looking at this general shape and look about them, they're going to look very similar to each other. Lepidoptera, which are your butterflies and your moths. So they have large wings and they're covered in scales. And to the naked eye, when we're looking at these photos, you're like, scales? I don't see any scales. Um, but if you zoom in, I think there might be a slide. Hopefully, there's a slide later that shows that in the wings, each of these little different colors that you see is a scale. You can sort of see a little tuft up here. Um, and that's what is causing for you to see those colors. They're just all little individual scales that are on the wings that moths and butterflies have. So under magnification, you can see what I am referring to. So moths and butterflies go through complete metamorphosis. Again, you go egg, immature stage, adult. And there's definitely multiple immature stages. Each time they go through an immature stage, they're going to molt and get larger. But because it's complete metamorphosis, we know that, as you can see here, the immature stage doesn't look like the adult. They don't look like the adult. And the immature stage has different mouth parts, different feeding sources in this case. So here we have the larvae with chewing mouth parts, and the mouth parts in the adult are reduced. Usually it could be a siphoning mouth part, so it's not even able to chew. Um, and many of the butterfly and moth larvae are considered plant pests. So although the adults are not feeding on the crop itself, it is the larvae. And although the adults sometimes might be beautiful, you don't exactly want the damage from the larvae. So you can't have one and not the other. Um, and so it's important that you keep different life stages all under control, if at all possible, because one becomes the other, if that makes sense. Some of the damage on foliage and fruit that you can see, like tomato hornwort feeding on tomatoes, um, I've seen them on grapes when they get this large, and they'll just defoliate a whole portion of a grapevine overnight. They are voracious feeders later, before they pupate. These get pretty chunky, pretty large larvae. The cabbage looper damage on lettuce, green fruitworm larvae feeding on apple leaf, and tomato fruitworm feeding under the calyx of the tomato. You can see the worm here, but you can see the entrance hole and the damage to the fruit. So, one thing to keep in mind, chewing mouth parts, portions of the plant material will be missing. You will have holes, you will have parts of leaves missing. And that's something to keep in mind because when you go and you see damage alone, you need to be able to determine, am I dealing with piercing, sucking mouth parts? Am I dealing with chewing mouth parts? That allows you to eliminate a whole group of pests and focus on the group that is likely to have caused the damage. I do want to say too is that insects that have chewing mouth parts will have solid poop. I know it might sound funny that we're going to talk about poop, but again, if you pull a leaf and when you don't see you see the damage but you don't see the insect anymore, when you're able to find solid frass poop, it tells you that insect had chewing mouth parts. When you find it's sticky, shiny and sticky, sometimes a mold is growing on it, you know it had piercing sucking mouth parts. It allows you also to identify into groups, what am I looking at? Okay, Hymenoptera, ants, bees, wasps, and sawflies. So the ovipositor is can be modified into a stinger. The ovipositor would be at the very, I don't have a good photo that shows, it's at the very tip of the abdomen here. Some insects in this order will have a stinger instead. So it'll be something either that's internal that will stick out to sting or stays external the whole time. And so this is why, for instance, honeybees, they can sting you, right? It's a modified ovipositor. It's the last segment. Ovipositor means it's the section of the abdomen where females lay eggs out of. And it helps cut the plant material, and then they insert an egg and then, fly off. So they have large forewings. Some are wingless. So you can see here is a winged ant. Some ants are winged. Some ants here don't have wings. So not every ant within the same species has wings, but there are groups within that species that form wings. So I don't know if we've gone over, this is a cuckoo wasp. This is a carpenter bee, but it's a male. So what we're familiar with typically is the black ones. They're all black and they're big and they're fuzzy. Female carpenter bees, but the male carpenter bees are this golden color, very pretty to see. And so when you come across this is a male. And a bumblebee, sawfly. Um, Okay, so they have chewing mouth parts, and they go through complete metamorphosis. As you can see here, you have the adult queen. She lays eggs, the larvae, the pupa, and they turn into adult workers as females. So this is when you're thinking of ants, um, it becomes more complicated. So ants are communal species. So it's not the same as every larva doesn't become the same role within the ant commune. So it becomes a little bit more complicated, more than what we really need to cover in this class. But they're social insects. The same thing with bees, like honeybees. There are worker bees, there's a queen bee, there's drones. They all play different roles, but technically they're all the same species, but they look different than each other and they play different roles. So it becomes a little more complicated again, not what we really need for insect identification. Because in those situations, where, honeybees are not causing damage to your crop. We really want to focus on the insects that are causing damage. One thing that ants can do is, as you can see here in this photo with the scale insects, scales produce honeydew. Ants will go by with their antenna and they tap on the scale. The scale would then emit the honeydew, and then the ants feed on that honeydew. So then the ants protect the scales, they tend them, and they protect them from biocontrol from getting to them, so then they can feed on their honeydew. Honeydew is a byproduct that these insects emit. Um, so it's not needed for their growth or their benefit. They suck in so much phloem that they automatically will emit the honeydew. So this is a problem in a lot of cropping systems where ants become a problem. Ants by themselves are not a pest species. But when ants tend your mealybugs, your scales, your leafhoppers, and protect them from biocontrol getting to them, then they become a pest species. Because those insects are allowed to reproduce and become high numbers and cause the damage. And it's because the ants are protecting them. So it's something to keep in mind. We see this issue in grapes, but I know that it happens in citrus and in other cropping systems where ants become an issue. Um, Here are some photos of the Parasophili. You can see the adult up top, and you can see the larvae down below. So if you see something that looks like this, you'll have an idea of what you're dealing with out in the field. Raspberry horntail, again, the larvae look nothing like the adults. The adults have this very long ovipositor, and the larvae will burrow within stems and hollow them out. So, wasps oftentimes are considered pest species to humans because they can attack humans and cause adverse health, results. But they are good predators too to have around. So whenever possible, trying to balance that. I mean, bees can attack humans, wasps can attack humans, but there's also benefits of having them around and having them in a cropping system. So, they're important for the balance of your ecosystem out there. So when you're looking at all of these, though, I just noticed now. Not all of them on this page are actually wasp that we're looking at, because the bottom right is the syrphid fly. It is a look-alike, and this is actually a fly, not a wasp. So you can see that this syrphid fly looks a lot like this wasp up here, but they're not the same. Um, the syrphid fly does not have chewing mouthparts where the wasp does. The syrphid fly is not able to sting you where the wasp is. So you will come across this a lot in the cropping system. Over time when I see them out in the field, it's not hard for me to know. I'm like, oh, it's just a syrphid fly. They sort of fly a little differently. They're not aggressive. Um, and you become familiar with picking them out in the cropping system. So we also have parasitic wasps that are beneficials. So we have wasps that will lay their eggs inside of larvae or inside of pupae. And so you can see photos here of different parasitic wasps. And Here's one. So with aphids, that's a good one to point out. Whenever you're looking at, you're assessing aphids. So you go out to a field and you pull some leaves and you're looking at the leaves and you're seeing that there's aphids. It's also important to note when you see signs of parasitism. So here, the aphids, once they become parasitized, they become sluggish and slow. They change color and they sort of balloon up. And then you'll see exit holes. So this is where the parasitoid chewed a circular hole and emerged. So when you start looking at your sample, if you're seeing signs of parasitism, it is possible that the parasitism will catch up with the population and keep it in check. It's something to keep in mind when deciding, am I going to do something about this pest species? Am I going to apply a pesticide, or a biopesticide, or am I going to allow beneficials to do their job? And it's a way of assessing it by looking for these signs to see if it's even present. And then uh, like here, down here is a stink bug egg where parasitoid laid its egg inside. That the larva emerges and it feeds on the egg of the stink bug, and then chews a round circular hole and emerges. And you can see when you're looking at stink bug eggs, when they're black, they're usually parasitized. So stink bug eggs do not turn black on their own unless something's wrong, and it's usually a parasitoid inside. Here are leafhopper eggs, and the parasitoid. When it's a healthy egg, you see one red eye, but when it's parasitized, you'll see two eye spots for each egg. As you can see here, here's an eye spot, eye spot. Here's the head of the parasitoid in the body. So these two here are about to emerge. You can see their body has formed underneath, and these are earlier on with parasitism where you see just the two eye spots. So with leafhoppers, you can check for parasitism um, by how many eye spots that you find. So, are we on time? Um, let's see. Adult females will lay their eggs in the host when it comes to when we're talking about parasitoids. So here an egg, the female is laying her egg inside of the host. So this will be our aphid. That larvae emerges from that egg and then eats the inside of the aphid and grows larger. It will then pupate inside of the aphid. At this point, the aphid has changed in color and size, and it's sluggish, or not moving at all. And then when the parasitoid finishes its development, it'll emerge from the pupa and it'll chew a hole, and it's a round hole that you're looking for in the body of the insect, and then it emerges in adults and goes through the process again. Let's see, where are we at? Okay. Um, wing traits. So this is something that can be interesting. Oh, here's my photo. Remember I was telling you how butterflies and moths have scales? So do you see these individual little scales that are creating the color that you see on the wing? They're very tiny. You have to see it under magnification. But moths and butterflies have these scales, which help you identify it as a moth or a butterfly. So wing traits, they may be bare, hard, scaled, hairy, absent. There's a wide variety. Um, and the wings are strengthened by veins. So here in your crane fly, you can see these veins. And these veins are actually used in identification of species. Sorry, not species, families of insects will have similar wing patterns. Um, Pteron is Greek for with wings. Oops. So Diptera, uh, di being two, and ptera being wings, two-winged. So this is flies and mosquitoes, and you have two wings and then two halteres. Hemiptera is hemi being haft and ptera meaning wings. This is the half winged. Hymenoptera, membrane winged is what it stands for. Coleoptera is hard wings. So this four wings are hardened. Lepidoptera, scale winged. So we have these scales in the wings, and then Dermaptera is skin or no wings. And so these are the wings of Dermaptera. They're very reduced, so they're very short. They don't cover the whole abdomen, but they are present. Um, so there's a wide range of wings within the insects, but they do help in classifying what it is that you're looking at out in the field. So, insect growth and development. Metamorphosis is the change in form and appearance from a juvenile to an adult insects. So, there are three ways insects develop into adults. There is no metamorphosis, also known as ametabolous. And basically, the immature form appears similar to the adult. It keeps molting and it keeps getting larger. And they look similar all the way across. I'm going to show you an example of what I mean in a later slide. Incomplete metamorphosis is the same as hemimetabolous, and that goes from egg, nymph, adult. Nymphs and adults look very similar to each other. They also feed on the same food source. Complete metamorphosis is also called holometabolous, and that's egg, larva, pupa, adult. Larva and adult do not look anything alike, and they usually do not feed on the same food source. Pupa is the stage in which it's a resting stage. This is a stage that usually they can't move, or they cannot move very much. They don't have legs. They're enveloped in some form, and then they will emerge as an adult with wings. Again, nymphs and larvae are immature. They don't have wings. They are not sexually reproductive. Adults of both have wings and are sexually reproductive if they have wings. Exception, female mealybugs is an exception. There are some other ones. So majority of them will have wings. So, what does it look like? Ametabolous or no metamorphosis. Examples are firebrats and silverfish. So, the immature stage looks exactly like the adult, it's just smaller. And each time it molts, it gets larger. And the difference, there's very few families that fall under no metamorphosis. So, the ametabolous group, firebrats and silverfish being them. And they will continue to molt even when they're adults, which is an odd characteristic compared to the other hemimetabolous and holometabolous that follow. So incomplete metamorphosis, also known as hemimetabolous. We're looking at stink bugs on the right and how the development looks from your first. Instar is a fancy word for immature stage. So it goes egg, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then the adult. And insects will go through anywhere from 3 to 6 immature stages. So it depends on the species. This one specifically, the southern green shieldbug goes through 5 immature stages before it merges as an adult. So egg, nymph, adult. Your nymphs, they resemble the adults. I mean, not exactly. This one doesn't exactly look green, but it's not the difference between larvae and like a larval form, a moth and a butterfly. Completely different. They look nothing alike. These at least look similar. And the nymph progresses through these different immature stages by shedding their exoskeleton or their outer, skin. They shed it, and then they're able to expand and grow before the exoskeleton hardens. And then they feed, and then they shed it, and then they're able to grow, expand before the exoskeleton hardens again. So each time they shed their skin, they grow in size. Both nymphs and adults will feed on similar food sources. So you can easily see them side by side on the same plant. They have the same mouth parts, so they will cause the same type of damage. Only adults have wings and they can reproduce. So when they have wings, they can disperse, they can fly away. The immature stages, because they don't have wings, can't fly away. They can disperse by walking, but usually cannot go long distances in general. So this is what we're looking at when we're saying incomplete metamorphosis. And some examples, you have potato leafhopper nymphs. Here they are, different life stages. You can see they're different sizes. I see a cast skin here and a cast skin here. This is very important to recognize when you're looking at insects, because this is a molt. They had to mold. This is the exoskeleton. They molted off, and then they increased in size. So there's different life stages here. You can tell from the different sizes of the immature stages. And then when they do their final molt, then they will emerge with wings that allow them to disperse. Lygus bug nymphs. This is the first nymph. Then it progresses. And as they get closer to becoming an adult, they start to grow these wing pads. And basically, this is the precursor to what the wings will be. So when this molts, then eventually it'll molt into adult to full wings. Again, you can see how the immature looks similar to the adults in incomplete metamorphosis in both situations. Not exactly, but similar, and they do feed side by side again on the same crop. Now let's talk about complete metamorphosis. This is, you can see in the photo, the drawing here, an egg. It goes to the first stage larva, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then it will pupate. So this is a quiet time in which it's usually not moving. And then it emerges as an adult. So you can see the butterfly looks nothing like the larvae. The larvae will feed on plant material. The butterfly feeds on nectar pollen, two different food sources and different mouth parts. You have immature stage with chewing mouth parts, adults with siphoning mouth parts. It's like a siphon that's curled up to be able to, they uncurl it to enter the flower to collect nectar. So again, larvae do not resemble adults. They progress through different immature stages by shedding their exoskeleton, and each time they shed their skin, they grow in size. Larvae and adult feed on different food sources, and only adults have wings and can reproduce. Again, the same situation. Immature stages cannot reproduce, and they do not have wings. So, complete metamorphosis. Here's an example using codling moth. We have eggs. This is the small larvae. Here's the eggs. The larvae, you can see the head capsule, meaning it's about to emerge. It'll cut a little slit and it'll emerge. Here's your larvae, your first instar. They will bore into the fruits through here, they're boring through the fruits. Here's the larvae here. You can see all the frass, which is their poop, and rotting damage that you see in the apple. It will then pupate in the bark. So this is the quiet time where it's not really, it's staying still, it's not moving for the most part. And then it'll emerge as an adult. You have your female and your male. And you can tell that this adult looks nothing like the larvae. And they feed on different food. This has chewing mouth parts. This has siphoning mouth parts. Their food sources will be different. Cabbage looper larvae. Again, here's your adult. Look nothing alike. They go through complete metamorphosis. So the larva and adult stages typically have different types of mouth parts and different feeding habits. The larvae of butterflies, moths, and flies cause damage to crop plants, but the adults consume nectar only or do not feed at all. So, although oftentimes we are, catching moths in traps, it is the larvae that's causing the damage, but one indicates that the other one's present. The larvae transform into an inactive pupal stage, and you can see their pupas range and what they look like, but it's inactive. And they can be found inside of fuzzy cocoons, in compacted hollows made in the ground, or exposed in or on the ground, vegetation, debris, compost, or other places. Um, as an adult, the insect will not molt or increase in size. So when an adult emerges, it's done. It doesn't shed again. Its exoskeleton, it doesn't get larger. Its abdomen can expand, but it doesn't get larger uh, as far as like growing length or width. Functional wings only appear in the adult stage. So we were just talking about the difference between incomplete and complete metamorphosis. And here they are side by side to give an idea of how they're different. There's a few more slides sort of driving this one home. On the left-hand side, you can see eggs are laid. You have your first instar, second, third, fourth, fifth. And then the final molt becomes an adult with full wings. Again, immature stages look similar to the adults. Only the adult has full wings and is able to reproduce. With complete metamorphosis, you do egg immature stages, a pupal stage, which is different, and then emerges an adult. The immature stages have typically have different mouth parts than the adults, not always true, but typically do. They look very different than the adult. They tend to feed on different crops or on different, like one will, feed, have chewing mouth parts and feed on leaves. The other one might be nectar feeding. Um, so which is different than the incomplete metamorphosis where they have the same mouth parts between the immature and the adults, and they feed on the same food source. So here's again some graphics of side by side, but also showing it in actual insects makes it a little bit easier. The top incomplete life cycle showing how the immature stages look similar to the adult. They get larger each time they molt, and they eventually end in wings. Where complete life cycle, immatures look nothing like the adults. They go through this pupal stage, and they look very different from each other. Here are some examples. On the left-hand side, hemimetabolous, which is incomplete metamorphosis. So you have hemipterans, mantids, cockroaches, earwigs, grasshoppers are incomplete metamorphosis. And you have your holometabolous on the right, or complete metamorphosis, which which includes beetles, butterflies, flies, wasps, snake flies. These go through complete metamorphosis. And this is just an example, so it doesn't cover all the ones that go through one or the other. All insects begin life as eggs. So eggs vary, considerably, but it's good to become familiar with what these eggs look like. So then you know what insect you have present. Oftentimes you'll come across a clutch of eggs and you're like, well, is this a good insect? Is this a bad insect? Is this a neutral insect? Something I don't have to worry about? Being able to become familiar with what the different species or groups of families eggs look like is important. So here's an example on the left of what moth eggs can look like. Syrphid fly eggs, stink bug eggs. Although this ranges considerably, this is just one species that has these like barrel stink bug eggs. Assassin bug eggs, praying mantid eggs, ladybird beetle eggs. So spending some time looking around when you becoming familiar with if you have a pest species that you're concerned of, you should become familiar with what do the eggs look like, and where are they laid and how are they laid, to be able to identify them, say, from insects that are predators, that are beneficials. You don't want to think like, oh, this must be a pest species. You kill it, you squish the eggs and they end up being ladybird beetle eggs, right? So proper identification is very important. Insect growth and development. Sometimes we don't actually see the eggs. And so this is true with aphids. The eggs hatch within the body of the female parent, and the immatures are born as living young insects. So it looks like they're having a live birth, but the eggs are actually internal to the female. And cockroach eggs are inside an ootheca, which is like this purse. And insects hatch inside and emerge as nymphs. So when this ootheca opens up, you have the nymphs emerging in a clutch. Larvae can look, you know, very different. If you're dealing with an insect that develops by complete metamorphosis, the larvae can look nothing like the adult. They do look nothing like the adult. So for each species that you're dealing with, it's important to try to become familiar with um, what insect larvae look like for the different species. So one really big one that I've gotten a lot of people asking about is ladybird larvae. They're like, oh my gosh, what is this pest? And it's like, no, this is your beneficial. So knowing what the larvae of ladybird beetles and the pupa look like is important so that you're not killing your beneficials out in the field. And so here are some like a scarab uh, larvae. They look like, what we call grubworms growing up. Flat-headed borer larvae you'll find in twigs and branches of wood that's been attacked. Domestic larvae, this is carpet beetle. We find these in our homes and in stored products. But it's a wide range. Caterpillars of different species, of different moths and butterflies. And here we have mosquito larvae. This is a type of mosquito larvae that we would find in stagnant water. So we've talked a lot about insects molting. And so this is a great, two photos shows you an insect actually molting. And so insects have this exoskeleton where other animals like humans and vertebrates have an internal skeleton. Theirs is on the outside. And so they have, in order to grow, they have to molt. They have to break open from that exoskeleton and then emerge. And then they will expand while that exoskeleton that's new has not hardened yet. And as they'll expand and then it hardens, and then they progress to the next stage. So again, molting is shedding of the skin, and this is important for identification because when you're out in the field, sometimes you see the damage and you see the exoskeletons, but you don't see the insect. The insect might be long gone. So being able to look at these shed skins and be able to determine what species, well, what family of insect, maybe not what species, but what are you dealing with? Is this a cast skin of aphids? Is this a cast skin of leafhoppers? And when you look closely under magnification, you can, make out certain features that will tell you what you are dealing with. So cast skins can definitely be used. It can also tell you in a sample if you have, a lot of cast skins. It tells you how long those insects have been there for a certain, time. So it's not a newly arrived insect causing damage isn't going to have hundreds of cast skins on a leaf. Molting or shedding their outer skeleton skin is their exoskeleton. You can see the photo on the right of the larvae emerging from the skin. And also here at the bottom, this is a leafhopper emerging. And so usually when they first emerge, the coloration is very different than the normal coloration of the immature stages. So when it's emerging here, you can see back here, it was a darker, looks like a grayish color, brown maybe. When it first emerges, though, it needs to have contact. The new exoskeleton has contact with oxygen, and that oxygen helps that exoskeleton harden. When it first emerges, it's very soft and pliable, which allows for that insect to expand and then become larger. The exoskeleton hardens, and then it stays that side until it molts again. Um, so each time they molt, there can be a slight to significant modifications in appearances. Usually, you're growing wing pads over time, and then the final molt, you have full wings. And they will molt again 3 to 6 times in the juvenile stage. Each species has a different number of stages, but usually a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 6 before they become adults. Insect generation is the period of time it takes for a hatching insect to grow to an adult and produce eggs of its own. And that's considered a generation. Some insects have one generation a year. Some have multiple generations that overlap. There's a wide range. Generation time is primarily influenced by temperature and food availability. So a lot of insect development is based upon accumulated degree days, which is the short version, it's just the accumulation of temperature over time. Um, and when it's warmer, meaning that when it's warmer, they tend to develop faster, and when it's cooler, they tend to develop slower. And so this generation time can vary from a few days in flies to several years in some beetles and cicadas. So again, it's a wide range, and it really depends on the species. Like aphids are constantly reproducing, right? You have many generations, but there are a lot of insects like flat-headed borer have one generation a year. So again, this has implications in controlling of these insects and understanding what you're dealing with. Many species spend the winter, which means that they overwinter or they diapause as larvae or pupa. In the spring or summer, emerge as adults, mate and reproduce, and then produce eggs. Some insects overwinter as eggs, some insects overwinter as larvae, some overwinter as adults. But in general, usually it is the larva or the pupa that overwinter. Some species of wasps, bugs, beetles, and leafhoppers spend the winter as adults, which I had just mentioned. So it it's good to know to identify what your pest species is, so then you can have a better understanding of what is its life cycle, when are its weak points in its life cycle that we can apply control measure to try to control this insect. If you have multiple generations in a season, or if you have one generation in the season, how you approach control would be different. So as much as we can learn about each insect that's causing damage, the more prepared we are to apply a control measure that would be most effective. Dispersal, something to keep in mind. There's natural dispersal and there's artificial dispersal of insects. That's a tongue twister. Natural would be like flying. So insects have wings and they fly. Taking advantage of wind or air currents that move the insects, hitchhiking on birds or larger insects. Sometimes it's human hiking on cars or vehicles that are moving from place to place. Ballooning. So this is what spiders do on the bottom right. This is called ballooning. If you guys have ever seen a field with just all this white wispy stuff, well, those are baby spiderlings that are casting their web and allowing the wind to blow them away from where they emerged. I've seen this and it's pretty cool. You don't want to walk through it, but it's pretty cool when you do come across that. There's also artificial dispersal. So again, human mediated, where we're moving, say, firewood in which flathead borer is inside, and we're moving it to other states. Well, that's human mediated movements of insects. And this is really important for invasive species because this is how invasive species get introduced to us in the US. Shipping containers, nurseries, the movement of plant material can definitely move insects around. Insect feeding damage. Okay, so we have insect mouth parts. We've been talking about these insect mouth parts. Now we're going to explore what does that damage look like according to the mouth part. So you can see on the right, there's chewing, piercing, sucking, siphoning, sponging. The two mouth parts that we tend to do, I guess it's three, that we really deal with a lot in agriculture is chewing, and piercing, sucking, and then rasping. Rasping is done by thrips. They have rasping mouth parts. But you can look on the left-hand side of how it's broken down, the different types of mouth parts, and the type of, then we'll see later what kind of damage. So again, the first three are the major ones in agriculture. Insect pests of plants have two basic feeding patterns, which I just covered. Damage symptoms reflect the type of mouth parts. So chewing and then piercing, sucking. Rasping can sort of be thrown into piercing, sucking. The damage looks a little different, but it's very similar. So with chewing mouth parts, your insect feeding, here are some examples of chewing mouth parts. When you have an insect that has chewing mouth parts of that plant or fruit will be missing. So when it chews, it's actually ingesting the leaf material or the fruits. And so when you look here at the weevil, there's part of this leaf missing. There is part of this leaf missing. If I come up and I only see this damage, well, I know that this insect had chewing mouth parts because part of the plant material is missing. It's been chewed away. Here's some examples of chewing damage. So you have leaves with holes in it. You have fruit that have holes, chewed, or portions of the fruit missing. You have, again, here, leaves with portion missing. Here is a grape bud that's, the bud itself is missing. So you have the outer protective layer of the plant, and there's no bud on the inside. It was gone. So this will tell me, okay, well, this insect, whatever insect did this, had chewing mouth parts. Example of the piercing, sucking mouth parts, we have mosquitoes that have a probe-like device called a stylet, and that's this right here. Aphids, you see the mouth part right here that's tucked under. Assassin bugs, they have a rostrum, or we also call it a proboscis. And then this is, again, it pierces into plant material or into another insect, and that's how it feeds. So the importance of insect identification. On the right-hand side, we have three true bugs that look very similar. Big-eyed bug is a beneficial insect here. This is a false chinch bug, which is a sporadic minor pest, and then a lygus bug, which is a major pest. Now, being able to tell the difference between these three is important, but just being able to tell the difference between, any insect you see out in the field is important. You don't want to mistake this as being a beneficial and doing nothing about it. And you don't want to mistake this as being a pest and then trying to get rid of them. So we have to really identify the problem before it can be solved. And this requires identifying, your pest. What is the pest that's causing this damage? So you need to identify what pest it is, your beneficial organisms, and then population levels. Is it a very large number? Is it a low number? So that you have an idea of whether you need to do something about it. It requires correlating the pest to the actual damage. Damage from insects, disease, and weeds versus damage from equipment, nutrition, water management, etc. So you can see the photos down here, the difference between your herbicide damage on the left versus grub damage on the right. It can look very similar. And so this is where it's very challenging at times to know, did an insect cause this? Maybe something else caused it. Maybe it's not insect related. So on the right here, you can see stink bug damage, katydid damage, below ground damage from root knot nematodes, damping off from fungi, primarily weather related, which it's not insects at all that cause this damage. It's often a problem in starts that have been planted in wet conditions with poor drainage. So keep in mind, just because you see an insect near the damage doesn't mean it caused the damage. I want to take you back to this photo here. When I went and saw this in the field of the grapevine and the bud was missing, there was ants going in and out of this area. Now, the grower thought the ants were causing the problem. And the truth of the matter is that no, the whatever chewed the hole is long gone, whoever chewed the bud. But the ants are attracted to the fact that now that there's a hole where the bud is, it's actually exuding liquid, and it was the ants were attracted to the liquid, the water and the nutrients. So just because I arrived and I saw ants going in it doesn't mean the ants caused the damage. And so that's something that's really important. Also, it's also important to know that it's possible that more than one thing is going on. That's something I'm always having to remind myself that when I go out to a field, just because we find a pest insect doesn't mean that it caused all the damage. It doesn't mean that there's not more than one thing. You could have more than one pest feeding on the crop, and it's exacerbating the damage. So it's not just one insect, it could be multiple insects. So it's something to keep in mind. And not all damage needs to be treated. So there's a certain amount of damage that would be expected. And sometimes it costs more to apply a treatment than the loss that you would have by doing nothing. And that's a hard one to sometimes wrap our heads around. But it's true. Not everything is what we would consider as economic, worth treating. Pests may no longer be present, and that happens a lot. I go out to field calls like, I don't know. I see the damage. I don't see the insects. And then this is where I use clues such as cast skins, type of frass, type of feeding damage, to be able to hone in and try to discover what it is that caused the problem at hand or what could be possible culprits. So pests may be difficult to find. And sometimes this is, soil-borne pathogens. So you like your phylloxera, which is on the roots, or nematodes. And irrigation problems and nutritional deficiencies often look like pests problems and especially diseases. So when we go out there, in the field, it's not always insects that are causing this damage. So we have to take a step back and look at the whole picture of what's going on and try to figure out using these clues. So on the left-hand side, you can see this damage on a grape leaf. Remember earlier I mentioned stippling, and this is what stippling looks like on grapevines. But stippling can happen on different crops. You can also see here on the right-hand side on an apple leaf. It's where an insect, when I see stippling like this, I know it's piercing sucking mouthparts. It's where an insect with piercing sucking mouthparts put its mouthpart into the plant material and sucked out all the chlorophyll, which causes the green color. And then now you have all these little random white marks throughout the leaf. Dead plant cells resulting from feeding by piercing sucking insects create these tiny yellow dots. Sometimes they're whitish if enough chlorophyll has been removed, called stippling. Leafhoppers are definitely known to cause stippling, but there are other insects that can cause this type of damage. Again, the ones that can have piercing sucking mouthparts. So here's a range of piercing sucking damage. In the top, you can see a stink bug that when it puts its mouth part into the grape, usually fungi is introduced at the same time, and then it starts to rot the fruit. And you can see this bottom right photo also too, how the fruit, there's no portions of that fruit missing, but there's definitely indentations and it's starting to rot. And because there's no portion of the fruit missing, you know it wasn't chewing mouth parts. And again, here's a picture of stippling, and then also stippling where you see the little black frost dots. So these little black dots are the poop of the insect, which lets you know um, leafhoppers have frost dots like this, and so do thrips. So that's something to keep in mind, that sometimes you see this together with stippling. Damage by sucking insects continued. Sometimes it'll make leaves curl like this, or fruit become misshapen. In strawberries, it's an issue with lygus bugs, which will make the fruit misshapen once they feed on the fruit, or discoloration here in tomatoes. And these piercing sucking mouth part insects can sometimes, depending on the species, vector plant diseases. So that's something to also keep in mind. Here's also more damage. When they put in their mouth parts, it creates this pithy area in the fruit that's damaged if you peel back the skin. And you can see what that damage, this is an apple, but if you were to shave this back, you would expect to have a very brown, pithy area, just like you have at the pear at the top. Here you go, lygus bug, which causes this misshapen strawberries, and then the scarring on avocados. So damage by chewing insects. Now this is different, right? Remember, chewing insects is going to remove part of the plant material. So you'll see holes, see portions of the leaves and flowers completely missing. You'll see holes here. You'll see holes in the bark when the insect is boring into the tree. So again, it is portions of the plant material missing, or fruit. Leaf miner injury looks a little different. And it looks like basically a snail just went across the leaf in random patterns. Um, but it is a larvae that is tunneling through this leaf, feeding its way through, that's causing that pattern. And you'll see here's a fully developed larvae to the right, and then what the leaf miner adult looks like. It's black and yellow, and they're small, the size of between a pumice fly and a fruit fly. Now, but they're black and yellow, and they're small adults. So the question is, in talking about mouth parts, could this insect cause this damage? If you guys can answer the question in the chat, I'm going to look at the chat and see what everyone thinks. Okay, Joey says no. Ellie says no with question mark. Like, no. Okay. Cynthia, yes, said no, because it's caused by piercing mouth, and I see a chewing mouth, which which is correct, which is where we're going with, okay, what if you came across this leaf and you saw this Katie did on the leaf? Your mind typically would be automatic, like, oh, that must be it. It must have caused it. But you got to take a step back and think. Look at the damage. Look at the insect and its mouth parts. Can it cause this damage? Because oftentimes you'll find other insects there that are not the cause. A katydid has chewing mouth parts. If it had caused damage to a leaf, there'd be portions of the leaf missing. But there's no portions of this leaf missing. It has stippling, which tells me that what caused this problem was an insect with piercing, sucking mouth parts. So that's good. There's also symptoms or signs of insect attacks. So shot-hole borer will have holes in the bark of wood that if you cut back, you'll be able to see the entrance of where the insect entered into the branch of the wood. Also the same with flat-headed borer, which tunnels through twigs and branches, and it causes a dieback of twigs, shoots, or entire plant stems or branches will be dying. And if you cut open the wood, then you'd be able to find this insect tunneling inside. Um, and you can see also below here, the insect, the larva entered here, tunneled all the way through, and now is making its home here within the wood. Now, this was wood that had been, cut in half, so you can see it. Um, but these are signs that an insect is inside, being able to see the entrance wound. Presence of insects or insect-related products on the plant. So we've been talking a little bit about this. And so when I look at this walnut, I don't know what caused this, but what I can tell you is that this insect had chewing mouth parts. And the reason I know is because this frass here is solid. And the solid poop is from chewing mouth parts. This frass, this poop, is solid. It's from chewing mouth parts. This over here, honeydew, and this spotted excrement is from piercing, sucking mouth parts. This honeydew, if you touch it, it should be sticky. And sometimes if you're like in public and you park your car under a tree, at a shopping mall or whatever, and you come out and you might end up with all this sticky honeydew if they have an infestation in the tree, which sometimes happens, all over your car. So honeydew, and then also on honeydew that's produced here over time, sooty mold will grow. So you'll see this blackening or gray growth on leaves. This is indication of piercing, sucking mouth parts. Here you go. Again, these are all indications that the insect that's the problem has these piercing, sucking mouth parts. Here we have dry frass being pushed out of plant material. This is dry frass being pushed out of an apple. Dry means chewing mouth parts. Wet means piercing, sucking mouth parts. So that's something, yes, this poop here looks a little wet, moist, but it's solid. It's not a liquid. So this helps. When you don't see the insect, but you see the damage, at least you can be like, okay, well, these insects are not on the radar. Now I need to look at what can cause it with these type of mouth parts. So again, and when talking about cast skin, so I see damage, I get a sample, I look under a microscope, I have cast skins, I look closer and I try to look for features that cast skin can be. And so you can see even here with the aphids, here's cast skins here, you can see white cast skins. So this is when they molt, that's their exoskeleton that they molted off. So that's something that helps you understand what type of population was on that plant. So sometimes you'll apply a control measure and you come back and they're dead, they're not there, but you can see the cast skins. You weren't sure exactly what was causing the problem, but you're able to look at the cast skins and maybe sort out what it could be. Presence of insect or insect-related products on plants. Wax is another piercing, sucking mouth part insect. So you see like all this wax, this is pretty bad. You can also see the dripping of honeydew here, right? So, and sooty mold growing here. This is telling you, here's your honeydew and your sooty mold. And this is telling you piercing, sucking mouth parts. Now, webbing, curled leaves, and dieback. So leaves that are curled or flattened, so like pressed together. This is telling me that there's a leaf roller or like larva that's inside. And so it's a larva that will roll the leaves and then feed inside and pupate inside, creating a protective area, and then they emerge as an adult. So moths, a lot of moths will do this behavior. Tent caterpillars, they are in large number and they create this webbing in trees. that is really thick. It almost looks like, oh gosh, a spider made this, but no, it's caterpillars that made it. They're called tent caterpillars, and they will defoliate that whole region of a tree. I've seen these in walnuts. I've seen them in pears. You can find them in a range of fruit trees. Here is the larva. This was a leaf that had been rolled, and you can see the webbing inside that they used to roll the leaf. And so this is indicative, okay, of you're dealing with a leaf roller larvae. Something to keep in mind, though, is that just because uh, other pests can cause damage that looks like insect damage. For instance, your European brown snail feeding on citrus. If you didn't see the snail feeding on it, you might think this is something with chewing mouth parts. That was an insect, but it's not technically an insect. It's a mollusk. And slugs eating holes in strawberries. Can have portions of that strawberry missing, which you would think is chewing mouth parts, but of an insect, but it's not an insect. So this is something that should be kept in mind when you show up and you don't see the actual insect feeding. So garden snails, they can have plant material missing. They like to hide in dark and cool places. They hibernate in this hot weather. And then this is what the eggs look like that you'll find in the soil. So if you see little eggs like this is indicative of snail population about to be. So this is something to keep in mind that it's not always insects. So insects are considered pests because they are the principal competitor of humans for resources, for food. About 97% of insects are not pests. They are either beneficial or neutral, and that's what I was saying. The range between 2 to 5% are pest species. So majority of insects out there are not bad. Their natural outbreaks can occur because of induced changes in biotic and abiotic environments. For instance, gardens are artificial environments with abundant food sources of food. So this can really help promote an insect population from really going off the rocker. Insects become pests when there's no population control. So you need to have predators, parasitoids that attack pest species and try to keep them under control. When that population of beneficials is not there, then the pest species can reproduce uncontrolled. This is part of your food web. So one keeps the other one under control and they go back and forth. Increase food, you're going to increase your population growth. So in maybe very wet and rainy springs, you have a lot of green growth. They might be feeding on the perimeter of row crops and move into those crops in high numbers. Decrease predation. So if you reduce your biocontrol out there, you're going to have increased population growth. Exponential growth for insects. They have small size, high reproductive rate, abundant resources, and respond to the environment. And this helps them be able to increase in exponentially out in the fields. So why are invasive species such a big deal? Well, they are new in the environment, so they are novel to the food web that exists here. They have rapid population growth and it's not controlled. And this is because there's no or few predators in the new environment. So insects that are invasive are usually, oftentimes, almost all the time, are introduced without their parasitoids and without their predators. And our native predators and parasitoids don't recognize it as prey. And therefore, typically, they become a bigger deal in a very short period of time. They're also often generalist feeders, meaning that they can, some of the invasive species I deal with feed on over 100 crop species or over just 100 plant species. So they will feed between ornamentals, woody species, and crops. And when you have something like that, it can always find a food source. So it's not limited by food source. It's able to move between environments. That really supports them to be able to reproduce uncontrollably. So what about good bugs? Where am I at on time, Ellie?
You're doing great. About maybe 40-ish more minutes, and we could do Q&A maybe towards the end of that, or if you're done before that, that's good too.
Okay, good. Good bugs. Let's talk about good bugs because I feel this is very important education for you to know when am I looking at something good in my field? When am I like, oh, things are going good. It's in balance. I don't have to worry about this one, or this is a good sign that this insect is here. So many insects in the garden are benign or beneficial. We've talked about that. And spiders, yes, spiders are good. They are good for your row crops, your orchards. They are great predators to have around. So here's some photos of beneficials. You have your predatory mite, you have parasitoid green lacewing larvae, green lacewing adults, big-eyed bug, minute pirate bug, black hunter thrips, damsel bug, spiders, different types of spiders. So this is a crab spider, it's a jumping spider. This is a millibug destroyer. I mean, this is just one slide of different predators and parasitoids. So let's talk, okay, predators. Predators, as you can see here, they will attack multiple insects in their lifetime. So they need to have multiple prey items to be able to make it through their lifetime. And this is in contrast to parasitoids, which we'll cover in a later slide. But as you can see here, they're attacking different insects. Parasitoids, on the other hand, this female will lay an egg inside of this nymph. That egg will develop and it will kill this aphid and it will emerge and be an adult. And that's just one per one. Now, this is the exception here. Of course, I have the slide here where there's multiple cocoons on one larvae. But typically, parasitoids, it's one to one. You lay one egg, that egg, kills one insect of different life stages depending on what the species is, and then you have one adult emerge. There are three types of biocontrol, but I'm just going to cover these first two that we should focus on. So, conservation biocontrol. Conserve what's already out there. So this includes planting hedgerows so that there's pollen and nectar for parasitoids that are alternate food sources to help support them through the season. Ways of not spraying harsh pesticides or so that it doesn't affect your biocontrol that's already out there. There's multiple ways to conserve what you already have and allow them to increase in numbers so that there's nice biocontrol happening in your field and in your orchard. Augmentation is when we take insects, we buy them, say, from an insectary, and then we release them in large numbers to have an effect on a pest population immediately. And so when you augment, you tend to have to do it on a regular basis. The insect that is biocontrolled does not become established and reproduce in the field, but it can have immediate control over your pest population that is out there. So now we're going to walk through some predators. I really want you to take a moment though, if you have if you have a ruler nearby that has millimeters, this will really help because I will forewarn you that these photos are under magnification. So you're not going to go in the field and see this detail. It's not going to look like the photo I just showed you. This minute pirate bug is about 3 millimeters long. Well, that's super tiny, right? So I can see all this detail, but when it's this tiny out in the field, you don't see that detail. Keep that in mind. Um, because the size really matters. So you have an understanding when you're out in the field and you're like, what's that? Then you can maybe associate it with what we have on these slides. So assassin bugs, these are great. This is a species that we have here in Northern California that's really abundant. When you do find the assassin bug, it's usually this one in the field. Um, your predatory stink bug, this is a rough stink bug. This is predatory. This is beneficial. Minute pirate bugs, big-eyed bugs, damsel bugs. These are all beneficials. You can purchase assassin bugs, minute pirate bugs, and I believe big-eyed bugs from insectaries. Soft-winged flower beetle, checkered beetles, ground beetles. Now, ground beetles come in brown and black in different sizes. Um, and there's other beetles that look similar, so that's something to keep in mind. Soldier beetles, rove beetles, we find these a lot in soil. These are great predators. Ladybird beetles, and ladybird beetles come in a range of colors, spots, sizes. But this is the most common convergent ladybird beetle that we have that's native around here. So all of these are predators. These are all beetles that are predators and good to have around and good to be able to recognize out in the field. Now, when it comes to flies, the adult flies are not predaceous. They're not, they don't feed on other insects. It's the larvae that feed on other insects, the ones on top. So this is the syrphid fly larvae, and this is the adult. This is the predaceous midge, and this is the adult. This is an aphid fly larvae, and this is the adult. So the adults are the ones that lay the eggs that become the predators. But if you see these on your crops, these are the good guys. Um, and what you can see is that compared to caterpillars, you don't have what is a noticeable eyes. The front of the body is tapered, and uh, they look different, say, than caterpillars, right? But take a good look at them. These are good guys to have in your field. Robber flies. These are super cool. So these are bee mimics. So you can see this one. This looks like a bumblebee almost. So when you see these guys flying around, they will grab insects mid-flight and they will attack them. And they will grab insects larger than themselves, which is pretty odd for insects. They tend to attack insects smaller than themselves. But barberflies are great predators. And how you can tell them apart from like a wasp or a bee, remember they have one set of wings, which isn't always easy to see when they're flying. But if you look at the top of their head, this isn't the best angle, but between their eyes stick up from actually their head. So there's a huge indent right here. So when you look at them directly, you see the eyes and then an indent in between. And so robber flies have that feature. And there, as you can see in these photos, there's a wide range of what they can look like. But they tend to be like bumblebee or bee mimics. Spider wasp are predators, specified wasp, velvet ants. I don't recommend picking these guys up. The female does not have wings and has a really, really bad sting. But good predators. Vespid wasp, great predators. They can become issues in large numbers and territorial, so it's something to keep in mind. but having one or two flying around is not a bad thing out in the field. Now we have some other, these are Neuroptera. So we have our snake flies. Well, sorry, Neuroptera's here, brown lacewing and the larvae, what it looks like, green lacewing and the larvae, and then snake fly adult and the larvae. The adult snake flies and larvae are predaceous. Adult brown lacewing and larvae are predaceous, and only the green lacewing larvae is predaceous. The green lacewing adult feeds on nectar pollen. Um, so these are all good to have out in the field. You can buy your green lacewing larvae for um, eggs and larvae for biocontrol from an insectary.
Hey,
Praying mantis.
Cindy. Sorry to
Hmm?
interrupt.
Yeah.
We have a quick, really great question. If you don't mind, I'm going to just insert it real quick here. So Cynthia Sterling asked, when we introduce beneficials, is there a way to help them establish and remain over time, like insectary plants and or other things? And I put my thoughts in the chat. I'm thinking maybe making sure they have consistent food sources over time that they prefer could help. So planning insectary species accordingly might be helpful there, but they are so mobile. I'm not really sure if you can really guarantee they're going to be where you want them to be. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like how to sort of keep them around?
Yeah, so it really depends on what insect you're talking about. Because if you're talking about convergent ladybird beetles, they have some innate behavior that's very different than the other species. So it does depend on which ones you're talking about. But in general, um, inundative releases are meant to be inundative. What happens is that you have a pest population, you release a large number, they feed on that pest, they push that pest population down, but then they can't find more food and they die. And this is the problem. So there's a lot of times those predators are sensitive to the population. They need a high enough population to support themselves, but once they start feeding on the pest population, that population gets so low that it's hard for them to find the food source. So they're doing a lot of time searching for food instead of feeding, and eventually they die. So the, in some situations, there's not really a way of supporting them to be longer, which is why they're used as inundative, as far as the biocontrol method. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You can support your natural native population of parasitoids and predators by giving them alternate food sources.
Nice. Okay. Thank you.
So praying mantises, these are generalist predators. They'll feed on anything. This is another photo of what an egg case can look like, and you can see that it's on a branch. So don't get rid of these guys. The eggs, they do overwinter this way. In springtime, they will emerge, and you'll end up with some really cool praying mantises. I love collecting these in the field, and I put them on my shoulder, and I walk around, and they just hang out with me. It's pretty cool. I think they're one of the most interesting insects out there. Um, so, uh, yeah, these also are available for release, but this one I'm not so sure how beneficial it is over time. When the immature stages first emerge, if they don't find food immediately, they eat each other. So, um, take it for what it is. But if you have them naturally occurring, supporting by not crushing the eggs, it's already naturally there. You didn't have to do or pay for anything to have them there. That is always the best way to have these insects. Dragonflies and damselflies, adults and larvae, are predaceous. These are actually beneficials to have around, and these are good to have in a cropping system. So remember we're talking about thrips, and a lot of thrips are a pest species. Here are two predators. So we talked about this black hunter thrip, how it's black. It has a very long, narrow head. It's very noticeable. But there's also the six-spotted thrip, which very looks just like other thrips that are pest species. The difference is it has these 6 spots: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you can see these 6 spots and make sure there's six, you have 6 spotted thrips, and that is a beneficial that's in there trying to eat your other thrips. So that's something to keep in mind. Spiders. Now I understand black widows are something that you need to be concerned about because they can cause harm to human health. Outside of black widows, all the other spiders out there are beneficial for your cropping system. You have spiders like jumping spiders that seek out food, so they actually look and search for food. And then you have spiders like this one that spins a web and lets the food come to them. But there's a wide range, and having a variety of spiders out there, they feed on a wide range of insects and pest species, and they are good to have around and to support. Predatory mites. So these are mites that feed on spider mites and leafhopper nymphs. And they're good to have around and support. And so when I'm getting a sample and it's showing me spider mite damage, I'm looking at spider mites, but I'm also trying to find any predatory mites. On this sample, am I seeing predatory mites? Are there biocontrol trying to do their job? What happens oftentimes is that biocontrol lags behind pest species. So your pest species will start to increase, and then here's your biocontrol coming up after it. And then pests will go down and the biocontrol will lag behind it. Sorry. A lot of talking today. So sometimes when you go out there, you need to assess if there is any biocontrol that I can see that's trying to get ahead of the population. So here's some parasitoids, and as we show, like some parasitoids, like this is the beneficial, right? And so not all insects attack just pest species. They also can attack beneficials too. But your parasitoids, here's stink bug eggs, is laying eggs inside of the stink bug eggs, or laying eggs inside of the caterpillar, the larval form, or an adult. So each biocontrol agent, the parasitoid, usually has a close relationship where it parasitizes one species or a group of similar species. It's usually a more it's not a generalist parasitoid. We don't really find those that I am aware of. They tend to be more specialized. We've already gone through this whole process of the egg being laid inside the aphid. The aphid then changes shape, it stops moving, it blows up and changes color. The pupates inside, it merges, chewing a round hole in the aphid, and emerges as an adult. Green lacewings, we talked about. Here's what the eggs look like on plant material. These are good. These are awesome feeders. And you want to support the adults with pollen nectar so that they can lay more eggs and continue this cycle. Some signs of parasitism. Something to keep in mind. These are leafhopper eggs in grapes leaves, and you can see one eye dot spot right here, right? They're laid in a row. But here below is ones that are parasitized. There's two eye spots, two eye spots, two eye spots. And this is telling me that this leafhopper egg has been parasitized. This is healthy. This is parasitized. Stink bug eggs, black stink bug eggs, indicate that these all have parasitoids in them. Signs of parasitism is, I cannot say that too fast. Holes, round holes. So parasitoids will chew a round hole that they exit from. So when you see this, you know that this had been parasitized. This is a mummy, and this is what they look like. So these are healthy yellow ones, And here are the ones that have been parasitized. They are blown up, they're discolored, they look different than the others. And then when the parasitoid emerges, you're going to see exit holes. So this is something when you're looking at aphids to keep in mind. You're going to want to look for this. If you know and you can see that parasitism is happening, then you need to just use that in deciding whether you're going to apply a control measure or not. Allow the parasitoids to do their job, or if you need to still apply control measures. So this is something to take into consideration. Parasitoids range, I mean, there's so many different species of parasitoids. So they look all very different from each other. They tend, not always, but they tend to be pretty small. And so, but like here, this one's not. So there's always exceptions. Okay, going into what is IPM. So IPM, I'm an IPM advisor. IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management, and it's an ecosystem-based strategy. So when we look at a problem, we're not just looking at the insect. We are looking at how everything works together because everything is connected. When you change one thing, there's going to be ripple effects. So you really need to look at the ecosystem and look at the problem within that context. So it's a strategy that focuses on the long-term prevention of pests or their damage. So it's not, hey, what can we do to obliterate this insect right away and not care about anything else? It's more of how can we prevent this from becoming a problem for the long term? And so through a combination of techniques, and that's one thing about IPM that usually you have to use more than one technique. And you layer these techniques so that they have a combined effect. And these techniques include biocontrol, habitat manipulation, modification of cultural practices, and use of resistant varieties. Pesticides are used only after monitoring indicates that they are needed according to the established guidelines, which are found in research. And treatments are made with the goal of removing only the target organism. Now, when I say pesticides, that includes organic pesticides. It includes oils and soaps. I'm talking about anything that kills insects. So it doesn't have to be conventional pesticide. And your goal is to apply something that is as specific as possible, that attacks that insect and not everything, if at all possible. Pest control tools are selected and applied in a manner that minimizes your risk to human health, to beneficial and non-target organisms, and to the environment. So these are all taken into consideration when we try to come up with a plan of how to reduce a pest population and reduce economic damage. So we try to think of IPM as this toolbox. And here we are with our toolbox. And we have, a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver. And so if I have a nail and I'm trying to I need to nail the nail into the wall. I'm not going to take out the screwdriver to do the job, right? I'm going to take the hammer to do the job. So the idea is that you need to grab the right tool for the right job. And there's a lot of tools. And so this is a list of tools. Now, this is not all the tools available to us, but planting weed and disease-free seeds, planting resistant varieties, cultivation, trap crops, hedgerows to support beneficials, scouting for insect pests, weather data or predictive models used to assist in decisions. Choose planting or harvesting dates unfavorable to the insect pest. Sometimes it's a modification of planting 2 weeks earlier, 2 weeks later, according to the insect pest life cycle. Soil solarization, removal of overwintering sites for the insects, the pest insects, that is, release of biocontrol, conservation of biocontrol, mating disruption or pheromones, trapping of the insects, barriers or row covers, mulching to prevent access to the pest access to the crop, Sanitation, like removing mummies of fruits or nuts that they can overwinter in the field. Destroying your alternative hosts that might be in the perimeter of the field. Crop rotation or fallow sometimes is necessary. Pesticides only when necessary in targeting that pest species. Again, that can be organic pesticides, that can be oils, soaps. It doesn't have to be, you know, a conventional pesticide. We have 6 steps of IPM. The number one step, the most important step. Remember it. You have to identify the pest. You need to know what species is your problem. And the reason being is that different species have different biology and life cycles that affect the way that you can control that insect. So it's very important that when I'm like going out, I need to identify the species, and then I look at what do I know about this species and where are the weak points in its life cycle that I can apply control measure to reduce that population. So you're going to assess that threat, and that's by sampling. You're going to go out there and figure out, well, how many, if it's leafhopper nymphs, how many leafhopper nymphs do I have per 20 leaves that I sampled? Now, these thresholds, a lot of them are available on UCCE IPM. And they have been found in research in which research was done of what is the minimum number of leaves that you can sample and count, and at what number do you need to do something about it. You're going to look at your management options, and then you're going to select the tactics that you're going to apply. You apply those tactics, and then you evaluate the results. Did it work? Is my population lower? You're going to record those results for future planning, and then you reevaluate. Maybe I need to apply a little bit earlier. Maybe I need to increase the number of my traps, or this worked really well. I'm going to try this again next year. But you want to document it so that you can go back and make sure that you're comparing apples to apples in the long run. So, what is a pest? Is this deer a pest? And the answer to this question is, well, it depends. Um, if this pest is in the forest, then no, the deer is not a pest. But if this pest is in your garden, eating your garden, yeah, it's a pest. So, the concept of what a pest is dependent on the situation. It is human defined. Pests are human defined. Does it affect, your economics? Does it affect your food source? Does it affect your human health? So these are questions that will help determine what a pest is, knowing that sometimes an insect might be a pest and sometimes it might not be. It all depends. So, we think of our economic injury level. This is, I know, very, very busy. So if you think of the number of pests on this axis, as you go up, the number of pests increases, and as you go down, the number of pests decrease over time. Here's time. And so here's in red is our pest population, and it's starting to increase. And over time, it's starting to increase. And it gets to this economic threshold. And this is the threshold in which, if we do not apply a control measure, this insect population is going to cause economic damage. It will continue to increase and cause damage that is economic. This is our economic injury level, which is the level in which above this line, the benefit to applying a control measure outweighs the cost. It makes sense to apply some type of control measure and spend the money to reduce the damage. Below this blue line, the cost is more than the benefit, meaning it'll cost more to apply a control measure than what you're going to save from the crop uh, by applying the control measure. So what we have is this economic threshold is a point in which it tells us, okay, we got to do something because insects don't immediately respond. When you apply a control measure, it doesn't immediately kill them or suppress the population. It takes a little time. So we don't really want to hit this economic injury level. Um, the idea is that you apply this control measure, it's the pest population will continue to increase for a little bit and then drop right back down. So, um, now I'm going to jump over, sorry, to UCIPM's website. They have redone the pages, so they look a little different now than they did if you've seen me give a presentation before. ipm.ucanr.edu. I bookmarked the page. It is a great resource for no matter what crop it is that you grow, or crops that you grow. This is what the page looks like when you go to this URL. And then at the top here, click on Manage Pests. And this will, pop up and it scrolls down even further. There's more information here. But for what we're going to be looking at today, you're going to click on this pest management guidelines. So I click on the pest management guidelines and it brings me to a page of just crops. And it's a long list. It goes down, as you can see, you scroll down and you find whatever crop you're working on. So I chose coal crops right here. Any of these coal crops. These all go to the same page for coal crops. So I chose coal crops as an example, and it brought me to a page that shows me a year-round IPM program for coal crops. So it tells me at different times of the season, if you click on this, it'll expand and tell you what insects you should be looking for, how you should monitor them, at what point do you need to do something, what diseases, what you need to be taking into consideration at that time of year. A lot of the crops listed have these year-round IPM programs, not all of them, but a lot of them do. But you can also find a lot, even if it doesn't have a year-round IPM program, you can also find a lot of information about certain insect pests. So if you scroll down, continue scrolling down this way, it covers insects, mites, and other invertebrates that are known to affect coal crops. But also there's a section of diseases, nematodes, weeds, vertebrates, and more information. There's a lot of information on this page that can be helpful. And so, you scroll down, you find the insect that's causing problems, you click on that, and it's going to tell you more information about its life cycle, about control measures, about organically accepted methods, about biocontrol, about cultural practices. And so a lot of information is included on those individual pages. Let's go back again. So when we're here and I said, okay, pest management guidelines, if you want to learn more about invasive pests and species are here. There's a natural enemies gallery, which is really good if you want to see photos of different natural enemies and information. I would just spend some time to go to this page and just see what's there. Start clicking on things that sound interesting. There is a lot of information that can be helpful on this page. Again, this, as you scroll down, I couldn't fit it all in my screenshot. There is a lot more articles below this. Okay, now you're out in the field, and I use this website, so I recommend this website, bugguide.net. You're out in the field, you come across an insect, and you're not sure what it is, what species am I dealing with. Bugguide.net is a website that a lot of entomologists use. So you get a lot of species identification, or at least identification into family, that you can find by posting photos on here. So this is what the page looks like. And you can search, you can put information like what you're trying to search up here and then press search. And so, for instance, I tried green leafhopper I found a green leafhopper in the field. I'm trying to figure out what it is, that green leafhopper, what species am I looking at? Well, I put green leafhopper and it brought up all kinds of different green hoppers, leafhoppers in the US. And then I'm going to scroll around and I'm going to look for photos that look like whatever it is that I have found in in the field. And so um, here it ends up bringing, does it show on this one? So these are leaf hoppers, but also here you go, a tree hopper showed up, right? I'm like, oh, well, I thought it was a leaf hopper, but maybe it's a tree hopper. And I start searching under tree hoppers, green tree hoppers, and it brings me up Specicilis festinus, a species. Now, this species is a three-cornered alfalfa hopper. And so I searched that name to try to see more pictures that look like. I'm like, oh yeah, this looks like what I am seeing out in the field. And you can click on, different ones. And I'm like, oh, this one really looks like it. So going back, I think it was this one here is the one that was clicked on. And it gives you classification. So at the very top, you have, it's a hemiptera, a Caenorhyncha, and it's Membracity is the family, and then it tells you the different classification of species, and here's genus, and then here's species, and then common name. Um, it shows you more photos and you look at it and you look at what you have, you look at where they found it, um, to make sure, okay, well, is this found in California? Well, this one says they found it in Tennessee. But that doesn't mean some insects are across the US. So here's the classification again. And then as I start scrolling down, I see, different information about this insect, the size, and it's like, okay, well, this is the proper size, the range, transcontinental Canada to Central America and West Indies. Okay, well, this insect, this species would be found in California. That makes sense. Food that is, other resources. So you can click on here to learn more about these insects. So this might be a little bit more than what you need, but I do find this as a good resource when I find an insect, even as an entomologist, when I find an insect and I'm like, oh, I think, okay, I know it's in this category, but I don't know what species I'm dealing with. This helps me be able to pull up information and it helps me with species identification. Not 100% of the time, but it can be very helpful. And so I wanted to pass along this information in case you want to figure out what's in your field. This could be helpful. And with that, I am done for today's presentation. Thank you guys for having me. I think I went over, but yeah, it's a lot of information, and I know it is. But some of this basic information is very helpful when you go out there and you're looking at the insects in your field or in your orchard to try to figure out what it is you're dealing with. So with that, Ellie?
Thank you so much, Cindy. That was awesome. I love all the photos. I learned so much. I was just like, I think Cynthia said this in the chat, but it's like insects 101, bugs 101. It's super,
Yeah.
super helpful. So thank you. So now we have time for Q&A. So for anyone who has questions for Cindy, please feel free to just unmute yourself and say them. I'm going to start off with one from the registration survey that actually came up several times. So Cindy, do you have apps that you trust for helping with identification via photos, or would you suggest just really relying on bugguide.net and the IPM website?
I do not use any apps. No, I don't even know of any of them. I have apps for weeds, like to identify weed species out in the field, because weeds is not my area, right? I know there are apps out there, but I don't know of any that I don't use any, and I don't know of any that I can recommend. I do recommend bugguide.net because the people, a lot of entomologists are on there, so it's not like doing entomology group on Facebook where you have a lot of people saying it's something it's not. It's actual entomologists giving the answers of I know that species, this is what you're dealing with. Um, so that's why I find it more as a trusted source.